My name is Sophia Martinez, and for 3 years, I've been married to the love of my life and enemy to his mother. Not the dramatic, screaming match kind of enemy, but something worse. The polite, passive-aggressive kind where every interaction feels like a chess game I'm destined to lose. Dr. Patricia Whitmore, my mother-in-law, is everything I'm not. Ivy League educated, from old money, with the kind of confidence that comes from never having to prove yourself to anyone. She's head of cardiothoracic surgery at Mercy General, a position she mentions within the first 5 minutes of any conversation, and she's made it crystal clear that her brilliant surgeon son could have done so much better than me. She's sweet, she'd say about me to her friends, with the same tone you'd use to describe a golden retriever. Just limited, you know? Limited. That word has followed me through 3 years of family dinners, holiday gatherings, and social events where I smile and nod while she introduces me as Daniel's wife, the one who works at the hospital. Never the nurse. Never by name. Just the one who works there, like I cleaned bedpans or pushed a meal cart. The truth is, I do work at Mercy General, the same hospital where Dr. Patricia Whitmore performs her legendary surgeries and commands respect from every doctor, resident, and administrator who crosses her path. But I work in the emergency department, 12 floors below her ivory tower operating suites, in a world she's never bothered to visit. I became a nurse because my little brother died when I was 16. Leukemia took him slowly, and I spent months in pediatric wards watching nurses hold his hand when I couldn't, explain procedures when doctors rushed through their rounds, and make him smile when everything hurt. They were the ones who stayed. They were the ones who saw him as more than a diagnosis. I didn't go to Harvard like Daniel. I went to community college, then state school, working 3 jobs to pay my way through nursing school while living in a studio apartment with 2 roommates. I graduated summa cum laude, but Patricia never asks about grades. She asks about pedigree, and mine isn't worth mentioning at her dinner parties. Daniel tries to defend me, bless him, but he doesn't understand the subtle warfare his mother wages. When she asks if I'm still doing the hospital thing in front of his colleagues, he thinks she's being supportive. When she mentions to her book club that I help out at Mercy General, he doesn't hear the diminishment. When she introduces me to new people as someone who assists with patient care, he assumes she's being kind. But I hear it all. The careful word choices, the strategic omissions, the way she manages to make my career sound like volunteer work I do to kill time. Last Tuesday was her monthly book club meeting at her pristine Beacon Hill townhouse. Daniel had convinced me to go, promising it would be good for me to network with accomplished women. I should have known better. The living room was filled with 8 women who moved in Patricia's social circle. Lawyers, professors, a federal judge, 2 museum curators. All accomplished, all connected, all speaking in the kind of shorthand that comes from decades of shared privilege. I sat quietly in the corner, nursing a glass of wine I didn't want, listening to them discuss a memoir about work-life balance for professional women. The conversation inevitably turned to their own careers, each woman sharing stories of recent promotions, awards, or recognition. "Patricia, dear," said Margaret Ashworth, whose husband ran the city's largest law firm, "I saw your interview in Boston Magazine. So impressive, being named one of the top surgeons in New England." Patricia preened appropriately. "It's been quite a year. The hospital just approved funding for my new cardiac research program. Very exciting work. And how wonderful that Daniel is following in your footsteps," added another woman. "Surgery runs in the family, I suppose." "Some things do," Patricia replied, her eyes finding mine across the room. "Though not everything can be inherited." The conversation continued, touching on children's achievements, career milestones, vacation plans to Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket. I contributed when directly asked, mentioning that work was going well, that I enjoyed my job, that Daniel and I were happy. Small, safe answers that didn't invite follow-up questions. During a lull in conversation, Margaret leaned toward Patricia conspiratorially, her voice dropping to what she probably thought was a whisper. I was refilling my water glass at the side table, close enough to hear every word. "She seems sweet," Margaret said, glancing in my direction. "But really, Patricia, she'll never be good enough for Daniel. No education, no prospects, nothing. I mean, what does she actually do at the hospital? File papers." Patricia's laugh was soft, almost fond. "Oh, Margaret, you're terrible. But," she paused, apparently weighing her words, "you're not wrong. I keep hoping Daniel will realize he could have chosen someone more substantial. Someone who could match his intellect, his ambition. But he seems content with simple. Simple. The word hit me like a physical blow. I set down my water glass carefully, my hands steadier than I felt. "Excuse me," I said with a bright smile. "I just need to use the restroom." The powder room was on the second floor, up a staircase lined with family portraits and degrees. Harvard Medical School diploma. Residency certificates. Awards and commendations. The Whitmore family legacy displayed like a museum exhibit. I splashed cold water on my face and stared at myself in the ornate mirror. Simple. No education. Nothing. I thought about the patient I'd held 2 weeks ago as she coded, my hands steady on her chest as I performed CPR for 12 minutes until the doctor arrived. I thought about the teenager I'd talked down from a panic attack while simultaneously starting 2 IVs and coordinating with 3 different departments. I thought about the night shift when we lost power and I'd worked by flashlight to keep a trauma patient stable for 40 minutes until generators kicked in. Simple work. Apparently, when I came back downstairs, the women had moved on to discussing summer plans. Margaret was describing her daughter's internship at a prestigious think tank. Patricia was planning a medical conference in Switzerland. Normal conversation had resumed. I took my seat and reached for my purse, intending to check my phone and count down the minutes until I could politely leave. But as I glanced up, I noticed Patricia had opened a magazine that had been sitting on the coffee table. It wasn't a book club selection. It was Mercy General's monthly newsletter, the kind of publication that gets mailed to every employee and major donor. Patricia received it as a department head, though I'd never seen her actually read it. She was flipping through absently, probably looking for mention of her own department, when her expression changed. Her face went completely still, then pale, then something I'd never seen before, shocked. The room was still buzzing with conversation about vacation homes and cultural events, but Patricia had gone silent. She was staring at the newsletter like it contained nuclear launch codes. Margaret noticed first. "Patricia, you look like you've seen a ghost." Patricia's eyes flicked to me, then back to the newsletter, then to me again. Her mouth opened, then closed. "What is it, dear?" asked another woman. Patricia held up the newsletter with shaking fingers. This is." I could see the page from where I sat. My stomach dropped. There, taking up half the page, was a photo of me in my scrubs, standing next to Dr. Rodriguez, the ER chief. We were both smiling, looking tired but satisfied. The headline, in bold letters across the top, read, "Local nurse saves 5 lives in emergency room crisis." The subheading continued, "Sofia Martinez's quick thinking and clinical excellence prevent mass casualty during chemical spill emergency." Margaret leaned over to look. "Oh my, is this someone you work with, Patricia?" Patricia's voice came out as a whisper. This is Daniel's wife." The room went dead quiet. I remembered that night 3 weeks ago. A chemical plant explosion had sent dozens of workers to our ER, many with severe burns and respiratory distress. We'd been overwhelmed, understaffed, running on pure adrenaline and training. When 5 patients came in simultaneously, all critical, I'd triaged, coordinated care, and worked alongside the doctors for 6 straight hours. I hadn't thought about it being newsletter-worthy. It was just work. What we do. One of the women was reading over Patricia's shoulder. Nurse Martinez identified the specific chemical compounds involved and initiated targeted treatment protocols that prevented systemic organ failure in multiple patients, she read aloud. Her expertise in toxicology and emergency medicine was instrumental in the successful outcome. Another woman looked up. It says here she has a master's degree in emergency nursing and toxicology certification from Johns Hopkins. Johns Hopkins. I'd completed that program through their online extension, studying nights and weekends while working full-time. I'd never mentioned it to Patricia because she'd never asked about my education beyond. Where did you go to nursing school? Margaret was still reading. She's been nominated for the state's Emergency Nurse of the Year award. This is the 3rd time she's been featured in the hospital newsletter for clinical excellence. The 3rd time. Patricia had been getting this newsletter for 3 years and had never noticed. Patricia finally looked up at me, her face a mixture of confusion and something that might have been embarrassment. "Sophia, I didn't know." "Know what?" I asked gently. "About any of this. The training, the awards, the..." She gestured helplessly at the newsletter. I set down my wine glass and met her eyes. "You never asked." The silence in that room was different from the comfortable quiet of women who knew each other well. This was the silence of people reassessing everything they thought they knew. Margaret cleared her throat. Sophia, this article makes it sound like you're quite accomplished in your field. I nodded. I love what I do. Emergency medicine is challenging but rewarding. The toxicology certification, added another woman, that must have required significant study. 2 years of additional coursework, I said. It's useful when we get cases involving chemical exposure, drug overdoses, poisoning. We see a lot of that in the ER. Patricia was still staring at the newsletter. 5 lives, she said quietly. It was a team effort, I replied. That's how emergency medicine works. Everyone contributes. But Patricia was shaking her head. No, I read these newsletters every month. This isn't the first time you've been mentioned, is it? I thought about the other articles. The time I'd developed a new protocol for pediatric trauma that had been adopted hospital-wide. The research I'd contributed to on emergency response times. The continuing education seminars I taught to new nurses. I've been fortunate to be involved in some interesting cases, I said diplomatically. Margaret was looking at her phone now, apparently Googling me. Sophia, it says here you've published articles in nursing journals. And you've presented at national conferences. Patricia's face had gone from pale to red. Why didn't you tell us? About any of this? The question hung in the air like smoke. 8 accomplished women waiting for my answer. I took a breath. Because every time I tried to talk about my work, the conversation changed. When I mentioned the toxicology program, you asked if I was thinking about changing careers. When I brought up a difficult case, you suggested Daniel must find my stories depressing. When I said I was excited about a research project, you wondered aloud if I had too much time on my hands. Patricia opened her mouth, then closed it. I stopped sharing because I got the impression that my work wasn't substantial enough to discuss at family dinners. The room was so quiet I could hear the antique clock ticking on the mantel. Margaret spoke first. Sophia, I owe you an enormous apology. We both do. She looked pointedly at Patricia. What I said earlier was inexcusable. I nodded graciously. Thank you. Patricia was still staring at the newsletter, reading the article more carefully. It says you stayed with one patient for 3 hours, monitoring him personally because you were concerned about delayed reactions to the chemical exposure. Mr. Petrov. He had elderly parents visiting from Russia. They didn't speak English, and he was unconscious. I stayed to translate and keep them informed. You speak Russian? And Spanish and some Portuguese. It's helpful in the ER. Patricia looked like someone had just told her the earth was flat. How many languages do you speak? For conversationally. I pick up basics and others as needed. The woman who had been quiet all evening finally spoke up. Sophia, would you mind if I asked where you did your undergraduate work? State University, I said. Full scholarship, academic merit. Patricia's voice was barely audible. Full scholarship? I nodded. I had a 3.97 GPA. I wanted to go straight into nursing, so I chose the program with the best clinical reputation rather than the most prestigious name. The federal judge leaned forward. That shows excellent judgment. Prioritizing substance over status. Patricia was flipping through the newsletter again, looking for other mentions of my name. She found 2 more smaller items about training programs I'd completed and a committee I served on. 3 years, she said quietly. You've been getting recognition for 3 years, and I never noticed, I finished gently. It's okay, Patricia. Different departments, different worlds. But she was shaking her head. No, it's not okay. I've been. She stopped, looked around the room at her friends, then back at me. I've been terribly unfair to you. I could have let her off the hook with a polite response. Could have minimized the hurt, made it easier for everyone. But something about sitting in that room, surrounded by women who had just spent 2 hours discussing their own accomplishments while dismissing mine, made me choose honesty instead. Yes, I said quietly. You have been. Patricia flinched like I'd slapped her. But, I continued, I understand why. You love Daniel, and you want the best for him. You had a certain picture in your mind of what that would look like, and I didn't fit it. You save lives, Patricia said, her voice breaking slightly. You literally save lives, and I've been treating you like someone who just helps out at the hospital, I said with a small smile. Like someone simple. The tears that gathered in Patricia's eyes surprised everyone, including her. Oh, Sophia. I'm so sorry. I reached across the coffee table and took her hand. I forgive you, but I need you to understand something. She nodded, waiting. I'm not going anywhere. Daniel and I are happy, we're building a life together, and I'm proud of what I do. I don't need you to approve of my career, but I need you to respect it. And me. Patricia squeezed my hand. You have it. You absolutely have it. Margaret was still looking at her phone. Sophia, I'm reading about this chemical spill incident. The article says if you hadn't recognized the specific compounds involved, those patients could have died within hours. I shrugged. That's why we train. So we're ready when something like that happens. Don't, Patricia said suddenly. Don't minimize it. Please. She looked around the room. I've spent 3 years minimizing her work, and look what I missed. My daughter-in-law is saving lives while I was worried about dinner party conversations. The evening wound down differently than it had begun. Women who had ignored me for 3 hours were asking thoughtful questions about emergency medicine, about my education, about the challenges of working in trauma care. Patricia walked me to the door personally, something she'd never done before. Sophia, she said as I was leaving, would you be willing to have lunch with me this week? I'd like to hear about your work. Really hear about it. I smiled. I'd like that. 2 days later, we met at a quiet restaurant near the hospital. Patricia asked question after question about my training, my cases, my goals, my research. She listened with the same intensity she brought to her surgical consultations. I want to make this right, she said over dessert. With Daniel, with our family, with my friends. I've been introducing you wrong. How's that? She smiled, the first truly warm smile she'd ever given me. From now on, you're Sophia Martinez, my daughter-in-law, the emergency room nurse who saves lives. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows how proud I am to know you. 6 months later, I was invited to speak at Patricia's Medical Society dinner about interdisciplinary cooperation in emergency medicine. She introduced me herself, listing my accomplishments with the same pride she'd once reserved for Daniel's achievements. As I stood at that podium, looking out at a room full of doctors and administrators, I thought about that book club meeting, about the woman who had whispered that I'd never amount to anything, about the mother-in-law who had spent 3 years seeing me as simple. Sometimes the most powerful moments aren't the ones where you prove someone wrong. They're the ones where you help someone see they were wrong. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that someone becomes your strongest ally. Patricia never missed another newsletter mention. In fact, she started saving copies and sending them to Daniel's extended family, with handwritten notes about how proud she was of her daughter-in-law, the lifesaver.